Grade 12 learners, welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Agnes Moabelo, and this lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Saibono Discovery Center. So Grade 12 learners, I've got the WhatsApp number there. You can WhatsApp your questions, you can WhatsApp your work there on 079 454 7536. I'm going to repeat the WhatsApp number. It's 079 454 9536. So please, Grade 12 learners, do not send your videos there. No videos, no voice recordings there, just for WhatsApp in terms of your concerns and questions. All right, welcome to today's session. I'm going to take you through this topic, Introduction to Evolution. And I'm going to take the first session, and my co-presenter Samantha will take the second session. Right, at the beginning of the year, Grade 12 learners, we gave you relevant documents that you need to have in order to prepare for this year. Now, one of the documents is the exam guideline of 2021. So make sure that you use this document as your, your Bible. You can use it as your hymn book, because everything that is on this exam guideline is examinable. Okay, so the topic for today is Introduction to Evolution, and this takes 54 marks of paper 2. So you really need these marks. 54 marks of paper 2. Now this is what we are going to look at. According to exam guideline, we'll be looking at definitions of biological evolution, changes in the characteristics of species. Also, we'll be looking at the difference between hypothesis and theory, and again we'll be looking at theory of evolution in regard to scientific theory. Again, we'll be looking at evidence of evolution. Now, on the evidence of evolution, what you need to know there, I'm going to refer back to grade 10 work where we are doing history of life on Earth. Now, on history of life on Earth, we're looking at the formation of what? Fossils. Now, again in grade 12, we are going to be looking at the formation of the fossils. So for evolution, for evidence of evolution, we're going to look at the role of the following: fossil record, we have biogeography, modification by descent, and also genetics. Again, according to exam guideline, this is very important. We'll be looking at the variation, grade 12 learners. Now there, what you need to know the definition of what? Biological species and a population, because sometimes we tend to confuse species and population. So we also need to know the following: variation that exists amongst individuals of the same species in terms of meiosis, and then mutation, random fertilization, and random mating. Again, we also need to know types of variation, because there we have got what? Continuous and discontinuous variation, whereby with continuous variation, we're looking at an example of what? Characteristic where there are a range of intermediate phenotype like height. Height is an example of continuous variation. And then discontinuous variation, example there is a blood group. Okay, so this document, you need to use it on your daily basis for all the topics. Like I've introduced that we will be doing an introduction to evolution. We need to know what exactly is evolution. Now I want you to look at this, that is this, on my far right, I've got the changes of the species there in terms of looking at the earliest forms and the present forms. So I'm going to give you just a second to look at what could be the changes from the earliest form of this to the present times, so that we understand clearly what is evolution. Can you have a look at that? This is the earliest form, and then the end form is a human being. So if you can look at the changes there that are seen in this formation, this basically is going to introduce you to the definition of evolution. So what is evolution? Evolution, grade 12 learners, is a process. Is a process that has what? It shows transformation. Transformation of Earth from its earliest forms to the present date, which is when we look at the earliest forms, it forms a diversity that characterizes what? Life on Earth today. So basically think of what? The ancient times, comparing it to the present times. Okay? Now, biological evolution, let's look at that definition of evolution. They can ask for that for 2 marks. So evolution, don't forget, it is a process by which we can see what? Population change over time. So evolution is change over time. Okay, so it is a process by which population change over time into a different, more complex in response to what? To change in their immediate environment. So what does this mean to us? This means that all present day forms of life, all the present day forms of life have descended from and are related to those that are lived in the past. Again, what we should know is that they may look different, okay? Now, when they look different, we say they may look different because they became modified from one generation to the other. They became changed, in terms of their appearance also. And if they look different, it means they were modified by what? From one generation to the other, right? Now we are going to look at evolution as a theory. What we're going to look at here, we're going to look at evidence for evolution. We're going to look at evidence for human evolution. We're going to look at evidence for out of Africa hypothesis. Now let us check. The theory of evolution here, according to scientists, is regarded as a scientific theory. It's a theory. However, we cannot say theory of evolution is a law. This is not a law, because not all scientists support evolution theory. So evolution theory is regarded as scientific theory because of what? It has been, remember, all theories need to be tested. Okay? All theories need to be verified. But we cannot be saying it is law, because not all scientists agree on the theory of evolution. So what we are going to look at, we'll be studying the evidence for evolution, which is fossil record, modification by descent, comparative anatomy. We'll be looking at biogeography and genetics under evidence for human evolution. Also, we'll be looking at fossil record, cultural evidence, genetics. Then out of Africa, we'll be also looking at the fossil record, cultural evidence, and also genetics. Now, again, because we're looking at the introduction here, these are the concepts that you don't need to confuse. We've got hypothesis versus a theory. Now, one may ask himself or herself, what is hypothesis? What is a theory? Okay, so we're going to look at the definitions of the two and also the examples on how we can basically differentiate the two. Okay, so for an example here, a hypothesis. So what we are saying with a hypothesis it is a prediction of a physical phenomenon that can be tested using observations, using experiment. So with hypothesis, it is a statement that the statement can be true and cannot be true. I'm going to give you an example here. So if I pose a statement to say girls are better than boys, so is it true? So to some of you, a hypothesis might be true, a hypothesis might not be true. So an example again where it shows the hypothesis so that we can differentiate two from a theory. This is the other example. To say the high evidence of HIV/AIDS is due to what? The lack of education about the cause of the disease. The statement might be true, might not be true. Okay, now looking at the theory, what is a theory? So it is a phenomenon that is supported by numerous observations, experiments, and also the scientific evidence. Like if I were to give you an example to say when scientists are saying everything that goes up comes down because of what? Due to force of gravity. Okay, that is a theory that was tested by using what? Observations, by using what? Experiments. Now, this is the other example of a theory to say the sun is the center of the universe around which the planets revolve. So I hope with these few examples, you can get the differences between a hypothesis and a theory, where we are saying a hypothesis can be a statement that can be true and might not be true. And when we look at the theory, is a phenomenon that is supported. It is supported by what? By observations. It is supported by the experiments as well, right? Now we're going to look at evidence for evolution. Remember when I started, I indicated that according to exam guidelines, we will be looking also at the evidence for evolution. Now, fossil record for an example. Now, in order to look at the ages of this fossil, basically you need to look at what? At the mud, all right? Now, when you look at the mud, it will tell you. So, when you look at the lowest part or the bottom part of the soil, it is the oldest. But when you look at the surface of the soil, it is what? The newest. So in terms of the biogeography, again, we'll be looking at what? You know, in some continents, we'll be having organisms that you can find growing up there. And then you can also compare continents to continents, looking at the plants that are growing there, animals that are growing in there. Okay, so with biogeography, we'll be looking at the continents. And then when you look at the continents, you can basically, like for this one, this is South America, and this is the bed that is growing there, the rear. Then look at Africa for an example. We've got that bed. Now, if we look at the features, the characteristics are different there. It is the bed, but due to the place, the space, the continent where it is growing, those beds might differ. Look at this one. This from Africa, we are having those ones with a long neck, and then look at this one, it has got a short neck, but both of them, they do not have what? They do not have what? Okay, look at this one. Okay, New Zealand. It's so short, you know, and then you can't even distinguish the difference between that neck is very, very, very short, but compare it with the ones that are growing in Australia, for an example. This is the emo from Australia. The neck is very long. So what we are saying with biogeography, the space in which or where the organisms, we can get the organisms there, but in terms of the characteristics, they might differ, though they are of the same species, right? And then in terms of homologous structures, for an example, this is the forelimbs of a human, and then this one is of a cat, and this one is of a whale, and this one is for a bird. Now what we are saying is the forms might differ. Okay, they are all the four limbs, but then their functions differs. Take for an example, the four limbs of a human being. You can use them to do what? To grab objects, to hold objects. But then if we look at the four limbs of the bird, it can use those to do what? To fly. So homologous structures, they are same in terms of what? They are structures, but they are going to differ in terms of what? Their functions. Okay. The next one is genetics. Through genetics, evidence for evolution through genetics. Now, in terms of the genetics, remember, all organisms do have their DNAs. Okay, siblings can have DNAs. Twins, identical twins, they all have DNAs, but their DNAs are unique. They are not the same. But with the DNAs, we can also look at what? At the relatedness of the organisms. Right? Evidence for evolution. I'm going to summarize types of evidence and also explanation for evolution. So we have the fossil record, we have the biogeography, we have genetic evidence, we have cultural evidence. So when we talk about the fossil record, explanation for evolution of what? Fossil record as type of evidence, don't forget that. Right? Now, with fossil record, it's an anatomical feature of fossil that are examined, that are compared, and that are placed in sequence from more simple to more complex. They also show what? They are the transitional species. Those transitional species are those that display characteristics in between those that it follows and those that it precedes. Now, transitional species may also share what? Some characteristics with each of these two groups. Let's look at the biogeography. Now, with the biogeography, think of what? A location where we can find living organisms. Now, biogeography, it is a location closely related of closely related species in an indication of how they may have evolved from common ancestor. Now, with the biogeography, it may be linked to what? Continental drift and speciation. We are going to learn about those later on. The difference between or what is continental drift and also what is speciation. Now, under the type of evidence, also we've got genetic evidence. Now, with genetic evidence, earlier on I gave you an example of what? The DNA. Okay, so we'll be looking at similarities and differences between genetic composition of what? The DNA of species. That shows what? Relatedness between the species and their evolution from common ancestor. Also, the type of evidence that we'll be looking at is the cultural evidence. And what is cultural evidence? As we explain it for evolution, or if we give explanation for evolution. So, with cultural evidence, for an example, the increasing complexity of terms such as what? Artifacts, tools, are an indication of advanced of the human intellect. So way back, our ancestors were using stones for an example. It will depend on the type of the stone. They were using stones to do what? To grind food, to do what? To dig holes. It will depend on the formation or how it looks, how the stone looks like. But because of evolution, what happened? Because of advances of the human intellect, now in present times, A human being can use what? In order to use a stone to cut meat, for an example. But now, because of the advanced human intellect, you can use a knife to do what? To cut your meat. Do you understand, girls and boys? Okay. So the next, we'll be looking at the fossil record. Now, under fossil record, we'll be looking at the different types of fossils. Now, what you see there, those are different types of fossils. Okay, we've got a mold or a cast fossil. This is an example, one example of what? Of a fossil, a mold or a cast. Another example, we've got preservation in natural matter. Now, if you can look, this was preserved. And then we've got mineralized soil fossil. Okay. So when we'll be doing human evolution, we'll be looking at types of what? These fossils. Also, we've got a living fossil. Now, in this case, we are given what? A fish. So these are the types of fossils that we will be looking at, or that we made consent for your topic. All right, you can have other, or you can give more examples of the fossils that you can think of. Right, now with the fossil record, I've indicated when we started that to determine the age, for an example, of fossil, how do we do that? Now the fossil record, look at this. So when you look at the rocks, I've said to you the oldest rock we can find them where at the bottom, but at the surface, when we want to read how old it is or when was it formed, at the top of the surface of the soil, we get what? The newest rocks. So the oldest rocks that are found deepest in earth was the youngest rock structure, okay, near the surface, like this ones. All right. Now this will be the oldest, followed by this one, followed by this one, then this will be the newest. So the oldest rock strata are found deepest in the earth, whilst the youngest are found okay, near the what? Near the surface. Can you see that? Right? Now, fossils of the organism found in the deepest, the ones that are found here, deepest strata, therefore lived on earth much longer ago than those species which are fossilized near the surface. These ones lived much more longer than this one that we find at the surface, near the surface. Okay. Right, in terms of biogeography. Now with biogeography, we're looking at the location, we're looking at the continents. Remember, in the continents, that's where we find what? Plants, that's where we find what? Life. Okay, we find plants, we find animals there. So plants may grow and spread. Animals there, what happens? They also grow there. Now this, for an example, with biogeography, what does it tell you? So this is the Permian period. Now with the Permian period, you think of what? Think of the one piece or one land mass. One land mass. So Permian period is 200 million years ago. So 200 million years ago, how were continents, or how did the continent look like 250 million years ago? So all continents were joined to form one land mass. For an example, continents were joined together. Can you see? Also in geography, this is what we're talking about. So this one land mass, we call it what? The Pangea. So what is Pangea? Is when all continents were joined together to form one land mass. Then what is going to happen? We are expecting to get animals there that are living there, plants that are growing there. So remember, it's one land mass, right? So we find animals, they can move around this land mass. Also, we find plants that can spread across the land mass as well. So this land mass, we call it Pangea, don't forget that. And then, when was it formed? 200 million years ago. Okay, then the Cretaceous period, when is that period? We say with the Cretaceous, okay, I want to go back. All right, just a moment. Okay, just a second. Okay, now with the, remember we had one land mass, and we call that one land mass Pangea. And then the Triassic period. Now with the Triassic period, that one land mass divided or separated into two continents, the South and the North continent, right? Now that one land mass divided, separated into Laurasia, separated into Gondwana land. So the Pangea, over a period of time, which is 200 million years ago, divided into two continents, that is the Laurasia and the Gondwana land. Now, what is happening there? What is happening there? Two main land of masses. Can you see? We've got two main land. Initially, it was one mass land, and then animals and plants on the northern land mass were separated from those in the south. So remember, we had the Pangea. Now it has divided into two. Obviously, plants that were found in one mass. I mean, animals also that were growing in that one land mass. Because of the splitting of the two, they can no longer move into this continent, and vice versa. Those that are in Laurasia cannot move into Gondwana land because we have what? The splitting of the two continents. Then the Cretaceous period, that is 65 million years ago, we had one large mass, the Pangea, that divided into two, right? Now, due to, when time goes on, due to evolution, what happened? We are now on present day position. If you look at this, presently or currently or right now, this is what we have. Those two, the south and the north continents, divided further to give us what? Different continents. So with those different continents, you can now see where Africa is, South America, Europe, Asia, India, Australia. Okay? Now this means in each continent there is life there. In each continent there are plants, there are animals. Okay? But in ancient days, when we had one land mass, they were moving around. You know, we had plants there, animals there. But as time goes by, what happened? Separation of the continents. Now we have got present continents. So with the Cretaceous period, it is the present day position of continents, right? During the movement of continents, some parts sank below the ocean and other parts rose above to form mountains. Okay? So when we continue with what we think causes the separation of those, let's summarize that now. Talking about continental drift. Remember, we used to have one land mass, which is the Pangea, and then over a period of time, then we had what? Laurasia, This is Laurasia separated from Gondwana land. Okay. Now, in modern world, that is now, in present times, this is what we have. We've got different continents. Remember, some of the living organisms that were there, we said they moved to the oceans, and also we had the formation of what? The mountains. Hence, we can see the areas which are filled of or full of what? Mountains, and then we've got continents. We've got continents that are surrounded by what? By the sea. Okay. Now, going back to continental drift. Remember, right now, in modern world or in present times, this is what we can see: different continents, and we are saying in South America, for an example, this is an example of bears growing there in South America. Compare it with those that are growing in Africa, right? We spoke about this earlier when we started. So they might be having what? They are the same species, but they are found in different continents. Obviously, if we look at the characteristics, or if we look at their feathers, their neck, the adaptation has taken place here when we have what? Continental drift. Okay. Now, the effect of continental drift on biogeography is that it provides evidence for what? For evolution of ancient species. Okay. So if you compare, or if you look at life in ancient times and comparing it with what? Life in modern times, because of evolution, obviously they are going to evolve. Species will evolve and change over a period of times. All right. So for an example here, flightless birds in the southern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, we've got what? Flightless birds due to what? Adaptation. Okay. And also with biogeography, it provides evidence for what? For evolution, right? Now let's look at the following questions. Okay. Having studied that introduction, guided by exam guideline, these are the questions that you might find related to the introduction to evolution. Okay. Now let's look at this question. The map below shows fossils found in different land masses. So these are different land masses. Remember, previously we had the Pangea, which was one land mass. Over a period of time, continents had to split into two. Now, over a period of time, again, those continents did what? Formed what we call the modern continents, where you can see where is this continent located. This is Africa, South America, we've got India, we've got Australia. Obviously, in all those continents, there is life. And when we talk about life, there are plants there, there are animals there. Okay. Now, this map below shows fossils found on different land masses. So this is our continents. Now, in each continent, we are given here that these animals are found in there. All right. Now, question one. Obviously, before you can even answer question one, you look at what is given in the diagram. So we can quickly look at what is given, girls and boys. So this is what? Fossil of the Lossigolans, and then, yeah, you can read all of those. So name the supercontinent from which the land masses shown on the map had originated. You look at the continents, you look at the living organisms. Basically, you will be given what is in there. then you will be reading what is in there before you can even answer those questions. So name the supercontinent. Now the supercontinent we said is Gondwanaland, remember? And then from the map given, identify 2 reptiles common to both Africa and South Africa. And South America, I'm sorry. Identify 2 reptiles common to both Africa and South America. So you go to the map and identify where we find Africa. So this is Africa, okay, right? And then also, where do we find South America? This is South America. Then the question says, identify 2 reptiles common to both Africa and South Africa. So you look at those reptiles that are found in South America and America. So can you see? Now, those are Cyanognathes and the Mesosaurus. All right. So you basically look at what is given, what you can find there. All right. You can find this in South America. You can find this in America. It has been given a code, a name to say this is what? The Mesosaurus and the Cyanognathes. Okay. Also, can you see this one? All right. For 2 marks. Now, the other question says, name 2 land masses on which Lystrosaurus had existed. So you go again to the map, you identify the Lystrosaurus, right? And then you answer 2 land masses which are found there. Now, the 2 land masses that are found there is Africa. This is Africa. Okay, Africa. And then India. Where is India? This is India. And then we've got Antarctica. So name 2 land masses on which Lystrosaurus had existed. So you look at the places where we find the Lystrosaurus. So any 2 of those will be correct. Okay. Right. The other question, let's check. The map below shows fossils found on different land masses. This map shows what? Fossils found in different land masses. So these are the land masses. There are fossils there. And then state the phenomenon related to the Earth's history that the fossil data shown on the map supports. Let's look at the question again. State the phenomenon related to the Earth's history that the fossil data shown on the map supports. All right, let's look at how we approach it. So the land masses were once joined, and over time they had to split apart, and that is continental drift. Remember, we had one land mass. Now, over time, it had to split into what? 2 continents. Then over time, it had to give the landforms of the modern times or of the current times. So state the phenomenon related to the Earth's history that fossil data shown on the map support. For 1 mark, the land masses were once joined over time and they had to split. That is a mark. And then immediately when we talk about the splitting of the land masses, think of what? It is nothing else but continental drift has taken place. And when continental drift has taken place, obviously there will be no movement of the living organisms moving from, once they are separated, when the continents split, there is no longer what? Movement there. All right. Now, we have another question relating to the concepts that introduces us to evolution. So the present day distribution of 3 closely related species 3 closely related species. So the present day distribution of 3 closely related species of the dog family: the coyote, the jackal, and the dingo. Here is the coyote, we find it here, and then the jackal and the dingo is shown on the world map below. Right, this dog family, the coyote are found here, the jackal are found here, and the dingo is found here. Remember, this is continents in the modern times. This is what we see now in terms of the continent, right? What type of evidence for evolution is represented here? What type of evolution is represented here? Now you look at the map, you've got the continents, and this is the modern times continent. We've got a family of dogs living in each of the continents. We were even given the names, right? What type of evidence for evolution is represented here? Okay. Now, the type of evolution, we call it what? Biogeographic. What is biological species? So also you need to know your terms. Like I've said to you, in most of the times you're confusing, or grade 12 learners, or we are confusing species with what? A population. So in this case, what is a biological species? Now with a biological species, we're looking at similar organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. So it's important also, after learning all those evolution concepts, the terminology, look at the mark allocation when you are given to us, or what I can say to you is look at what is given. In this case, we are given a map. In this case, we are given organisms that can survive there, right? Now, what is biological species? So a biological species is what? Similar organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. There's no situation whereby different organisms can interbreed, isn't it? So we can have interbreeding between dogs so that we can get what? Fertile offspring in this case. All right. So I hope you have learned the few concepts there in terms of the introduction. So the last question that I'm going to do with you, so that my co-presenter Samantha will finish the second session, right? So this is another example that is given from the past papers. So this is the scenario given. Remember, we are given a map here. It is east coast of Africa. We've got Madagascar, and they are separated by what? By the ocean. Okay, so let's attempt this question. Portals and lemurs are small mammals, right? Scientists believe that portals and lemurs share a common ancestor that existed where? In Africa. Presently, portals only occur in Africa, while lemurs are only found where? In Madagascar. All right, read with understanding. Now, initially, we are saying portals, lemurs, they seem to share a common ancestor, and that existed where? In Africa. And then presently, we're saying portals only occur in Africa. So we'll find portals here, and then lemurs are only found where? In Madagascar. So Madagascar is an island off the east coast of Africa, as shown in this diagram. So explain how continental drift could have affected the distribution of the common ancestor. Explain how continental drift, remember with continental drift, continents are separating. Okay, continents are drifting apart. So explain how continental drift could have affected the distribution of common ancestors. Now, initially what we're saying, there was one large continent initially. Remember, we are explaining how continental drift, how continents drifted apart. How could it affect distribution of what? Common ancestors. So initially, there was one large continent, and then the common ancestor existed throughout this continent. So the common ancestor of the lemurs, of the portals, existed in this one large continent. That was previously, or in ancient days, right? This was proved by what? By the scientists. So there was one large continent. The common ancestor existed through the continent, and when Madagascar separated, Madagascar separated, the common ancestor was found in both regions. It was separate. Madagascar was separated, so it means the common ancestor was found in both. Remember, initially there was one large continent, right? And then the common ancestor existed throughout this continent. So it means even if Madagascar can separate in each of the newest of the newly formed two parts that arose from Madagascar, separation of Madagascar, we are going to find that common ancestor. So the common ancestor was found in both regions. All right. So I think for now, I'll just pause so that Samantha will continue with the last session. All right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, grade 12. I'm Samantha Raghunathan. I'll be taking you through the second half of your introduction to evolution. So I encourage you to pay attention because this is a very, very important section in grade 12. It consists of at least 1/3 of your paper, this section. So what we are doing today is we're going to continue with evidence for the theory of evolution. Remember, it is a theory, and now we are asking ourselves, why is it that scientists believe in this theory? So this is the evidence that we are going to unpack. So the first type of evidence we are going to unpack is modification by descent. Modification by descent. Descent basically to me means where you are coming from. Okay, so if you are looking in terms of your family, your descent, whether you are descended from a German background or an Indian background or an African background, that is your descent. Your grandfathers and your great-grandfathers, where did they come from? So that is what I understand by descent, and I want you to keep that at the back of your mind when we are discussing this, okay? With regard to this, one of the modification of descent that we are going to study is homologous structures. Now, homologous structures, this word homologous is not new to you, grade 12. You did the word homologous when you were doing genetics. And we're going to break it down again for those of you who forgot what you did in term 2. But homologous, homo meaning the same, and logos meaning in the same position, or the same site in which you can find it. So when we say now homologous structures, what we are actually doing is we are saying, already from the word we can see these are same structures which are found in the same place, isn't it? These are structures which are similar in the way they are built, and they are all found in the same place. So let's see what we are talking about. If you look at the diagram that we got here, we've got a beautiful diagram of a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. So you think to yourself, these are very different organisms. How can they be similar? Let's see how it is that we are similar to cats, whales, and bats in our bone structure. Now, the good advantage of this diagram is that the different types of bones are colored in different colors. Can you see that, grade 12? Let me show you an example. You got the humerus, okay, which is your bone which you find on your arm. But if you look at the cat, now this is the forelimb of the cat, and if you look at the limb of the cat, it's got the same bone. Can you see there? And if you look at the whale, there's the humerus of the whale. It's colored in gray as well, grayish purplish. And then we got the bat. The bat, even though this is found on the wing area, but can you see it's also got the humerus? So this is what we mean by homologous structures. Homologous structures, as the definition says, as similar organisms adapted to different environments, the function of their appendages. What are their appendages? The limbs. We are talking about the limbs. It's just a fancy word for attachments to the body. Appendages, attachments, okay? The result of descent with modification from a common ancestor. So if we look at the other bones, we can see there's the ulna. We can see that the same bones are found here. So I'm not lying, grade 12? You can see there is physical evidence. That is why scientists believe in this theory. Not all scientists, some scientists, as my co-presenter Agnes has highlighted. Some scientists believe in this theory of evolution because they are looking at these bone structures and they're saying, hey, these are homologous bone structures. The bones are the same in all of these structures. And if we look at the phalanges is basically in layman's terms like the fingers, okay, but not always the fingers, because we don't have fingers. In cats we got paws, am I right? So there's the phalanges, there's the blue phalanges. I love this diagram. And then you've got the whale, the flipper of the whale. The flipper of the whale, there you see the phalanges there in blue. But the bat, now think about this. This organism, the whale, is in the ocean, and the bat is in the air, in the sky, but they have a similar structure. So that is why when scientists were studying all of these things, they got this idea that hey, there's something happening. All of these had to come from more or less the same place. So let's look at the bat. There's the wing of the bat, and there's the phalanges in the bat. So they make a pretty strong case for the theory of evolution. And it's important that we understand what is required by the syllabus. So we need to, so this similarity in the homologous structures is termed modification by descent. So some of the answers you're going to have to give the term modification by descent. If they give you a diagram in the exam and they give you this exact diagram, then they ask you, what evidence for evolution does this represent? So you're going to answer modification by descent. Okay, so let us look at the what exactly happens. So even though these are homologous structures, so we're talking the arm, we're talking the flipper, we're talking the paw, we're talking the bat's wings, all of these structures, even though they are similar, they serve different functions because of the different environments that the organism is found in. Okay, I'm a human being, last time I checked. Okay, but if I need to pick up this pen, I've got my arms, my phalanges, here's my humerus, there's my radius, and here's my phalanges, and I use it to pick up, I use it to curl, I use it to eat. So that is the reason that I have the structure. So that is how I use it. But the cat doesn't use it in the same way. The whale uses it to swim. So can you understand this term where they say similar organisms are adapted to different environments? Because the environment, you remember what environment? It's the surroundings that we find ourselves in. Okay? So the whale finds itself in the ocean. Is the whale going to fly in the ocean? No, it's not going to fly in the ocean. Okay? So we need to understand the very important statement, a similar organism adapted to different environments and the function of their appendages change. So yes, we see the sentence in fancy English, but we now understand what it really means. It's very important that you understand what it means. And if you don't understand what it means, we always say use these diagrams because they're going to help you to remember. Because if you look at this diagram now and you close your eyes, you can picture the diagram in your mind, and that's going to help you to understand the concept. Okay? So birds' arms became wings to flap. A human arm is used to pick up and grasp, like what I'm doing right now. A horse's arm became a foreleg to run on. Remember, horses, we call them legs, but they're actually forelegs and they're hind legs because they're in front and behind. So this basically leads us to believe that modification of skeletons, remember skeletons got to do with bones, by descent is therefore evidence to support the theory of evolution. So now, besides biogeography and fossil evidence, other evidence that we are now talking about is modification by descent. You must not you must not forget this term, grade 12. Please don't forget this term. It's important because when they ask questions on this section, usually they ask it in terms of multiple choice questions or give the correct biological terminology or short questions. And if you look at section A of your exam paper, you will notice there's a lot of terminology that you need to study. So when you come to this section, even though you are doing evolution and there's so many beautiful diagrams, you need to know the terms and you need to understand what it means. Now we understand what modification by descent means. So we're continuing with modification by descent, but now we're focusing on the 5 digits. We call these 5 digits, this sort of arrangement, we call it a pentadactyl limb. Now those learners that are doing maths and maths lit, you know, pent is 5. Okay, we can't say 5 fingers, we refer to them as 5 digits. Okay, let's read what they have to say. The fact that all mammals have the same pentadactyl limb structure suggests that mammals descended or originated from, so now we're talking mammals, isn't it? Mammals have the same pentadactyl limb structure suggests that all mammals descended or originated from a common ancestor. So 3 very, very important points. Mammals pentadactyl limb, and common ancestor. And the limbs have been modified over the different species. This is just a reiteration. I'm not going to go into all the structures again, but now we're focusing on the pentadactyl structure. So basically, we term it fingers, okay? So that's what they're talking about. If you look in this diagram, you can see, we are not lying to you, grade 12s. You will see the five pentadactyl limb structure. So there you go, in the human arm, there's it in the horse, there's it in the whale, okay, and in the turtle, in the frog, and in the bird. So even though I want you to also remember a pentadactyl limb structure, the outward appearance doesn't look the same. But when we look on the inside of the bone structure, I mean, if you look at a whale's flipper, does it really look like a human arm? It doesn't. But we're talking not about the outward appearance, we're talking about the inward appearance of the skeleton. So that is where the scientists are basing their evidence for evolution on. Okay? So now I want you to remember that when it comes to the structure, you need to remember that, the section, the introduction to evolution, they're asking you about evidence for evolution. So evidence, if you watch CSI and all these movies, these are things like in a crime scene, they'll find maybe a glove there that belongs to someone and then they match the DNA and all of that. So it's evidence. So these are also tools and these are structures, these are things, physical things, tangible things that you can find to support this theory. So obviously when they're asking you in the exam, they're going to include diagrams. So learn your diagrams, know your definitions, and know how to apply it. So there's various ways they can ask you. Because examiners, when they're setting your paper, they're given a recipe, and they say you must ask the learners terminology. You must ask the learners questions based on name or explain. These are different words that you're going to find. You're not just going to ask. They're just not going to give you a diagram and say, okay, what diagram is this? No, they're going to test your knowledge. They're going to test you and ask you how well you understand it. Comprehension skills is one of the skills that is needed. Okay? So bear that in mind. So learning the content is very good, wonderful, but you must be able to take that content and understand it and know how to turn it around to answer the question. So let's look at this diagram. The diagram below shows the structure of 4 limbs in the different species. Now, grade 12, this diagram is not strange to you. We've done it in the previous 2 slides. So any question that you get on this, you should be able to answer. Okay? That's how much confidence I have in you. So, the first one. Now, I want you to look at the 2 questions. Remember I said they ask you to name, but they don't only ask you to name, they ask you to explain. So, when they say name, you're going to give a term, isn't it? When they say describe, you're going to give more information based on something. So you're going to elaborate, okay? So let's look at the diagram. We're going to first look at the diagram. We're going to study the diagram. We're going to see what's going on in the diagram. And then we're going to attempt to answer the question. Sometimes you can even look at the diagram. Don't look at the questions and try and make sense of the diagram. It says, name the line of evidence for evolution represented by the diagram. This is a no-brainer, because already we can see homologous structures there, okay? There we go. Modification by descent. Remember your grandfather stories I said to you in the first slide? Modification by descent or homologous structures. I like to remember homologous structures because it's easier, because I remember it now from genetics, okay? Not structures, but the word homologous. Then it says, describe how the line of evidence mentioned in question 1 supports the theory of evolution. So first they're asking you to name modification by descent, and then they want to ask you, okay, so you're telling me homologous structure. What do you mean by homologous structures? How does this support it? Then you must talk about what we discussed in the previous slide, that although they have a similar bone, remember the humerus? Although they have a similar bone structure or body plan, these structures are adapted to perform different functions. Remember the man and the whale? We discussed it. Okay? They indicate that they have a common ancestor. So all of these structures, they evolved from way back then, and now this is how they look. They ended up in different areas. This could be due to biogeography, because some we find in the ocean, others we find, like Agnes says, on land, in different parts of the land, certain islands, all of those things. Okay? So what they also like to do is they like to ask you uh, things in a table. So the next evidence for evolution we're talking about is genetics. Now, genetics is something you are familiar with. Remember, in genetics, you did DNA and RNA, and you spoke about chromosomes and passing on genes to the next generation. So you have a previous knowledge. So you're just going to use that knowledge to better understand the section. So in this section, they like to give you data. And on the data, you must be able to interpret the data. Because remember, life sciences there are skills involved. Okay? So let's talk about this. Here they give you names of organisms, okay, mostly humans. And what they're doing is I'm not even looking at the question as yet, I'm looking at what they're giving me, because I'm trying to make sense of what they might ask me. So they got human chimpanzee, human fruit fly, human horse. And then they talk about the number of the amino acid differences. The number of the amino acid differences. So let's see what are they asking us, or where is this leading us to? So they are saying here, the more similar the nucleotide bases of organisms are, the more closely related they are. Let's listen to this carefully. The more similar the nucleotide bases, when they say more similar the nucleotide bases, immediately I say in my mind I'm saying, oh, the more similar the DNA is, the more closely related it is, isn't it? Because remember, nucleotide bases, what do they form? They form DNA, and DNA codes for proteins. Ultimately, we have genes, which is passed on from one generation to the next generation. So when we see when we see nucleotide sequences, and the nucleotide sequences are similar, it means that they are closely related. That makes sense, because if you look at identical twins, for example, identical twins, that means not two twins, a set of twins side by side. If you look at them, there would be very little difference that you would see. That could be a secret to remembering this, because the least amount of differences that you find between the two of them, the more closely related they are. Okay? Let's talk about what is going on here. So let's look at the human and the chimpanzee. So the number of the amino acid differences here is 0. That means they be very, very similar to the chimpanzee, grade 12s. I know we don't like it, but we can't fight science, okay? Then we look at the human and the fruit fly. 29 differences. I mean, look at the size of the fruit fly and look at us, okay? The human and the horse, 12 differences. I would have expected it to be a little more. Then you have the pigeon and the human and the rattlesnake, human and the rhesus monkey, 1 amino acid difference. Screwworm fly, 27. Okay, I feel a little better now. Human and the snapping turtle, 15 differences in the amino acids, in the number of the amino acids. And the human and the tuna fish, 21 differences. But what I want us to make note of is that there are about 97% similarity between the sequence of the DNA of a human and the chimpanzee, and 99% similarity with other humans. So that is something that is quite shocking. This suggests that humans are more closely related to each other than any other animal. Remember, they said between humans, between you and I, we are humans, there's 99% similarity. So that means our basic structure, our phenotype is basically more or less the same, just the one difference. But they say between the human and the chimpanzee, it's 97% difference. Shocking. It is really, really shocking. And that is why life science is the most exciting subject there is. And then, therefore, we say we may share common ancestor with who? With this guy here, the chimpanzee. Remember, this is a theory. There is other evidence to support other beliefs. However, This is the theory that in particular, that we are studying now in grade 12. Now, I want you to take note of the question before, the table before this, and now we're getting another table. So we can already see a trend. You must be able to pick up a trend. When you're looking at the past year papers, say, hey, for evidence of evolution, they like to ask tables. And in those tables, they give numbers. And then they're asking me to compare. Okay? So the reason that we are doing this activity is so that you can get an idea of how they're going to ask you the question. Let us read what they are saying. They're saying scientists compare the number of differences in amino acid sequence. Are they asking us for the type of differences? No, they're talking numbers here. Okay? Differences in the amino acid sequence to see how closely related the species are. Fewer differences in the amino acid sequence means they are more closely related. We know this, isn't it? The less differences means we're closely related. That's why we look very similar to our brothers and sisters. As much as some of us don't like it, you in a family would look very similar. Cytochrome C is a protein that occurs in many species. The amino acid of this protein differs between species. The table below shows the number of the sequence of the differences in the amino acids. So this is differences in the amino acid sequences of 3 types of species, A, B, and C. Now, I want you to take note of, in the question before this, it wasn't really a question, but in the example before this and the example I'm doing now, I underline things, I circle things that are important that I'm going to come back to later on. So when you get your exam paper, you need to look at the question. Look at what the question, because most of the time the question is actually giving us some of the answers. So we need to pay attention to this. So let's talk, okay? Here we got species A, and they're comparing it to species B. So we know that from our information here, they're looking at the number of differences in the amino acids. So what do we understand? The less amount of differences in the amino acids, the more closely related. It's common sense. It's common sense. There's nothing difficult about that. Okay? So if you look at species A and species B, and we compare the differences in the number of the amino acids, there's 11 differences. Okay? So that's between these two. But if we compare species A and species C, look at that, only 3 differences. So who is more closely related? I'm not looking at the questions. I'm looking at the table. That is what you should do. Because sometimes the questions can confuse us. So I'm trying to make sense of that. Hey, if they ask me the questions now lower down, I'm going to know already what to answer. So we know that species A and species E, they must be more closely related because they have the least amount of differences in the number of the amino acids. Let's see, maybe there's someone more closely related. We don't know. Let's look at species B and species B. Obviously, there's not going to be any differences. It's the same species. We can't compare. Species B and species C. How many differences? 10 differences. So we already know who's more closely related and who's more distantly related, just by looking at the data that they give us. So life science is a subject where you need to analyze the data. You need to look at the numbers. But before you look at all of this, you need to remember the least amount of differences means they are more closely related. Think of those identical twins I told you about. Okay? Now don't go write identical twins in the exams, grade 12. Please don't get me into trouble. I'm just using this as an example. Okay? Let's see. What type of evidence for evolution is being used in this table? Can it be fossil evidence? No. Nowhere here does it say fossil. Don't go write fossil evidence. You must look to see what information are they giving. Did they give a picture of islands and land? No, they did not. But what they did give is amino acids. And we know that amino acids are involved in genetic evidence. Hence, we get that answer. Genetic evidence. So the minute you see amino acids, it's genetic evidence. Okay? In this particular question. Right. Now, I told you that it was going to get a little more complicated. Those of you who don't recognize this diagram here, we call it a cladogram. It's a cladogram. So in the cladogram, we can see. Notice I'm not even looking at the questions. I'm just looking at the diagram because I'm trying to make sense of the diagram. So here they repeated what is in the question, and they ask you. So I can already see there's a common ancestor here. Can you see this common ancestor? This is the great, 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 great grandfather from way back then. And then we can see speciation occurred, and then you can see that this branch of the cladogram, there was one species formed, and adjoined to this branch, you can see there's another species that's also there. So you can see they're sort of on the same branch, which means they are more closely related. Don't you think so? But then we got number 3. Number 3 is coming directly from the common ancestor. It's on the other side. So look, this is what the diagram looks like. Let's look what they are asking us in the question. The question says, give the letter. They didn't ask you to name. They said, give the letter. Grade 12, we need to learn to listen to instructions. If they say give the letter, you give them the letter. Because if you give the word, it's going to be marked wrong. Give the letter of the species A, B, and C that should appear in the positions 1, 2, and 3. So they're saying A, B, and C. They're saying we must fit it into this diagram here. We must fit it into that diagram, and you must say, where does it fit in? So initially we did say, because there's only 3 differences between species A and C, we said that they must be closely related. So my guess is that A would be there and C would be there, or C would be at number 1 or A would be there, either or, okay? Because I'm guessing that they are more closely related. And then where would species B? I'm thinking species B might be at number 3. But let's see if we are correct based on our logic, and when we look at the diagram and when we analyze the numbers. So there we go. I didn't lie. There's it. Number 1 would be A, or it would be C, because remember, it could be A or C. And then number 2 would be C or A, because remember, C and A have only 3 differences, so that would make them more closely related. But species B has got 10 differences, so that would sort of put species B, or like right on the other side, on another branch, and there we'll find species B at number 3. So doing this example is not the most important thing. Learning how to analyze a question, look at the diagram, make sense of the diagram, use the content that was discussed in the first half of the session. You must take the content, you must learn the content, because otherwise you won't be able to understand the question. Okay? So if you move on, there we go, more data. Are you seeing the trend now with evidence of evolution? Okay? They like to ask numbers and they like you to compare. So let's see. The table below shows the number of differences in amino acids. You see how popular this particular type of question is. So you must now look at the past exam papers, and you must look for questions like this even after the session, because prelims is almost upon us. The sequence of the protein albumin in 4 species of primates. So now we're looking at, you must make sure when you're looking at the question, are they talking about similarities or are they talking about differences? You must make sure you understand the question properly. So let's see. Between a monkey and a human, the differences is 32. In between a human and a gibbon, the number of differences in the amino acids is 14. Between a gorilla and a human, only 8 differences. Between a human and human, self-explanatory, no differences, okay? Right. Gorilla and monkey, 32. Gibbon and gorilla, 14. Gorilla and gorilla, nothing. So obviously there's not going to be a difference within the species of the amino acid. A gibbon and a monkey has 32 differences. And a gibbon, no differences. Monkey and a monkey, no differences. So already now, let's not even look at the question. Already now, we can already assume, based on our previous questions, I'm sure maybe they're going to ask us which 2 are more closely related. Okay? I'm sure they're going to ask us which 2 are more closely related. So let's see. Which 2 species are likely to have been separated most recently? When things are separated most recently, that means they were just together. That means they were part of the same group. And then they were split. So Humans and monkeys. Humans and monkeys, there are 32 differences. I don't think so. Because if there's 32 differences, they were separated long time ago. Okay? Gorillas and gibbons. Gorilla and gibbon, 14 differences. Maybe. Gibbons and monkeys. Gibbon and monkey, 32 differences. No, I think right now 14 is looking like our lucky number. Let's look at gorillas and humans. There's humans and there's gorillas. It's only 8 differences. I would go for D. I would go for D because there's the least amount of differences. But let's see what the examiner says. D. Okay, so even if they were recently separated, we know that they are closely related. Right, let's look at the next question. We're going to go quickly through them now because now you know the trend. You must check the diagram, see what's similar, look at the numbers. The smaller number, most likely, they are closely related in the differences. So let's read. The amino acid sequence of the hemoglobin molecules. Hemoglobin we learned in grade 10, remember? In the blood. Are routinely used to determine how closely related different species are to each other. So we also use blood to determine that. The following table shows amino acid sequence of a small portion of hemoglobin of various organisms. So already when I look at this, I must compare this table and I must see which ones is almost identical. And if I look at this, I can already see, if you look at the human, and you look at the chimpanzee, it's the exact same amino acid sequence. Can you see there? So it has to be human and chimpanzee. There we go. Right. Let's look at the next question. Give the letters of the diagrams that represent homologous structures. Now look at this diagram. If I look at this diagram, because I studied homologous structures earlier on from our previous slides, yes, I can look at these two, but I already know which is my homologous structures because I remember the bet. I remember the pentadactyl structure. There they are. So I already know that it's A and C. Okay. Describe homologous structures provide evidence for evolution. We said that because they have similar structures, they both have a common descent or common ancestor. There we go. They have similarities in their structure and therefore they have common ancestry. Besides studying homologous structures, name 2 other sources that scientists presented as evidence for evolution. Now this you've done earlier on in the session. We're going to just go through it quickly. It's a fossil record, which you did with my co-presenter, Agnes, biogeography and genetics. Okay? And then sources of variation. One of the sources of variation is mutation. A sudden, unexpected change in the genetic structure of the DNA cell. This is very, very simple because we've done it in genetics in the previous section. We're not going to dwell on it. But we do know that we got our DNA bases. And this is the original code for the DNA. And we can see that it says CAT, CAT, CAT because we know they found in triplet. So that one triplet base can form a amino acid. So we can see that this is CAT, CAT, and they form the amino acid histidine, 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 and so on. But if we look at what happened, because mutation is a sudden, unexpected change in the genetic structure. So something is going to happen. So they're telling us already that when it's mutation, like if you watch movies like Spider-Man and X-Men, because they got bitten by something, it changed their genetic structure and then they had superpowers. Very, very similar sort of principle in this one, because something happened and it changed the genetic structure. Because here we see we got histidine, histidine, histidine. But now all of a sudden we got proline. If we investigate further, we can see that this was in fact adenine. But adenine was replaced by cytosine. Okay? And that has changed the genetic structure. So sometimes this can not have a big impact on the amino acid or the DNA. It can function normally. Other times it can impact it and it will not be able to function. So we need to know that mutation is a source of variation, because mutation can cause the appearance and the the sequence of the DNA to change. Other sources of variation is meiosis. This is something that we have done grade 12 already. When we did meiosis, we know crossing over, you can see the diagram. There's the paternal, we'll just say paternal because it's blue, and there's the maternal homologous chromosome. And what happens? Crossing over occurs. That means the chromatids start to touch each other. And if you look at the recombinant means part of a chromosome broke off and then it recombined. There we see it's recombining. And we see that the paternal has genetic material from the maternal, which is now red, and the maternal has got blue, which means that it's got the genetic material from the father or the male. Okay, the same with random arrangement. Okay, there they're saying crossing over results in recombinant chromatids. We've done this before, we're just revising a little. This we already know by looking at this diagram, we know it's metaphase 1. And remember, in metaphase 1, when they align at the equator, it doesn't mean that all the maternal chromosomes align on one side and the paternal. It doesn't mean it's going to arrange in any way. We use colors here. So here you can see it's all red on one side and it's all green. But here's 2 red, 1 green. 2 green, 1 red. Here you got 1 green, 1 red, 1 green. So you can see it's random. Random means that it's in no particular order. There's no order followed. And this results in genetic variation. That means the offspring is going to be different. There's different scenarios for offspring here. So this is the source of variation. Remember, variation means that they become different. They're not the same. Random fertilization. We know that when we have an ovum, usually there's just one ovum, but then we got thousands of sperm cells. And these sperm cells, each of these sperm cells, they've got a maternal DNA and they've got paternal DNA. So when they fertilize this ovum, as you can see, these are all the probabilities. Quite crazy, right? But we can see that there are many, many possibilities. That means we're not going to have clones as offspring. Clones means identical. They look identical. The offspring is going to be different in many cases. Then we got random mating. Random mating is a very interesting topic, but we will leave that for another lesson. Between organisms within a species. That means usually in human beings, we have a male and a female and they mate for life. That means the rest of their life, that is the only person they will mate for. Hopefully, or we don't know. But in any case, sometimes we have a male and we have a female, or for example, a male animal and a female animal, but the male mates with many different females. So that also will cause genetic variation because the male has different DNA makeup and the females have all different DNA makeup from their parents and their grandparents. We're going to go quickly through this. Evidence of hominid cultural evolution. Already when I see cultural, I'm thinking tools, I'm thinking cultural day, we wear different things. It's all got to do with the way of living at that point in time. So they say it can be found in the fossil record. This would include the position of the spine to the head. I don't think so. I'm not sure about that, but I don't think so. The length of the upper limbs, no. The number of teeth present, no. The presence of stone tools. Stone tools, as my colleague Agnes has highlighted, that is part of cultural evidence for evolution. So I would go with that. Variation within a species, random mating and asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction, they produce identical offspring, so it can't be asexual reproduction. Mitosis and random fertilization, it can't be mitosis because mitosis produces identical offspring. Random mating and random fertilization, that is what we just discussed. I think that could be the one. Mitosis can't be our answer as explained previously. So what we see now, D is our correct answer because of stone tools, and C is our correct answer because it's random mating, random fertilization. That means there is no order. Okay, we're going to continue to, okay, now we got the idea. We're just going to continue to types of variation. Now, if you look at the people in this picture, they all look very, very different. You got people who've got different skin color, They've got different types of hair, curly hair, straight hair. We know that as human beings, we are not walking around as identical carbon copies of each other. And this is what we call continuous variation. So continuous variation basically is characteristics where there is a range. Now I want you to remember the word range, because when it comes to continuous variation, it's something you can measure with numbers. Like for example, height, weight, skin color, hair color, things like shoe size. Everyone's got a different shoe size. If you're tall, you would have different heights of tall, like 1.52, 1.57, 1.4, and hand span, the size of your hand. So these are all different things which we regard as continuous variation. That means there's a range of intermediate phenotypes. Phenotype is the outward appearance, like we discussed in genetics. But then there's a different type of variation. It's called discontinuous variation. And we'll remember dis and distinct categories. So how I remember discontinuous, that for me, it's either or. It's either you have a free lobe or you have an attached lobe. It's either you have a type A or you have type O. It's either or. Okay? There's no range here. It's either you're male or female. So these are distinct categories. It's either you can roll your tongue, like I can, or you can't. Okay? So discontinuous variation is the different types of variation. So how can we ask you this? So when we ask continuous variation, we know that there's no distinct categories, and we know that it's quantitative. It's usually got to do with numbers. Remember shoe size, remember height and all of that? Height, weight, heart rate, finger length, leaf length. It doesn't only apply to humans, it applies to plants as well. And then most of the time they will ask you this in the form of a graph, because a graph is quantitative. It's got to do with values. And it's controlled by the gene and the environment, a range of phenotypes. But discontinuous is the direct opposite. There's no in between. Like I said, it's either or. Either you can roll your tongue, fingerprints. No one's got the same fingerprint except identical twins, but that's the exception to the rule. Blood groups, you can't have blood type O and blood type A. No, it's either or. And they will ask you in terms of a bar graph, because there's limited number of phenotypes. So our final question and our last question has got to do with a case study. This is also different. Now we're not getting numbers. I'm going to give you a different type of question where you're looking at a population of the deer. The population produces individuals that can survive maturity. So now already in this picture, we can see there's white deer, there's black deer, and there's white deer. And something happened. What happened? Some of the individuals survived longer and produced more. And this is how they started, and that is how the deer ended. So you can already see from how they started, they had more black deer, but when they ended, they had less black deer. So the majority was white deer. So let us look at the question that they would ask us. List 3 sources of variation in the species. Now remember, I didn't ask you for evidence of variation. So don't come and tell me about fossil evidence and all of that. We are talking about within a species. Read the question carefully. We know meiosis gets you a mark, but we also know that the crossing over is part of meiosis. Random arrangement is part of meiosis. So instead of getting 2 marks, instead of getting 1 mark, if you name random arrangement of chromosomes separately with crossing over, you will get 2 marks instead of just saying 1 mark for meiosis. Random mating, we discussed, random fertilization, and mutations. Explain why the above is an example of discontinuous. Last question. Why is this discontinuous? Let's look at this diagram. Remember discontinuous, I said it's either or. So here we would have to have in our final group of species, we would have to have either black deer or white deer. We don't have that. Okay? I mean, we've got that, but if they had to mix, if there was an intermediate, it would be gray. I don't see gray here. So let us see what the examiner has to say. The deer are either black or white, as we say. There's the black deer, there's the white deer. There is no intermediate characteristic gray. Remember, discontinuous doesn't have an intermediate. It's either it's one or the other. So this brings us to the end of our second half of the presentation, grade 12. I hope you are more aware now of the type of questions that can be asked and the fact that you really need to go through past your papers in order to understand the concepts and how it is asked in the final exam. I wish you all the best and good luck for the prelims, preparation for the prelims. Thank you.